The Ottoman Empire was one of the most enduring and powerful empires in history, ruling for over 600 years and spanning 3 continents. But before it became a global force, it began as a small principality in Anatolia, rising from the remnants of the Seljuk Sultanate and the declining Byzantine Empire. How did a minor Turkish state grow into one of the world's most dominant empires? The Turkmen of Anatolia and the rise of Osman I. The origins of the Ottoman Empire can be traced back to the Turkic migrations from Central Asia. By the 13th century, the Mongol invasions had devastated much of the Middle East, causing many Turkic tribes to flee westward into Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. These nomadic warriors settled in the frontier regions of the crumbling Byzantine Empire, where they formed small independent principalities, or beyliks. One of these beyliks was led by Osman I, a warrior chief who established his own domain around Surgut. Osman's followers, known as Ghazis, were Islamic warriors who believed in expanding Muslim rule into Christian territories. For them, war against the Byzantines was both a religious duty and an opportunity for wealth and power. This ideology would define Ottoman expansion for centuries to come. Osman I's wars against the Byzantines, 1299-1326 CE. Osman I began his conquests by raiding Byzantine lands in western Anatolia. His early battles focused on seizing small forts and towns that were weakly defended, expanding his influence along the Sakarya River and near the Sea of Marmara. Unlike other Turkish rulers who fought against rival Muslim beyliks, Osman directed his attacks primarily against the Byzantine frontier. This strategy allowed him to gain land for his warriors, wealth from plundering Christian settlement, reputation as a champion of Islam, attracting more Turkic warriors to his cause. However, the Byzantines still held strong fortresses, making it difficult for the Ottomans to achieve rapid expansion. It wasn't until 1326, when Osman's forces captured Bursa, that the Ottomans truly began to rise as a regional power. Osman died shortly after this victory, leaving his son Orhan I to continue his work. Orhan I in the first Ottoman capital, Bursa, 1326 he transformed Bursa into the first official Ottoman capital, establishing administrative structures to govern newly conquered lands. A professional standing army, moving away from temporary warbands. A system of taxation and governance to ensure stability. But Orhan's ambitions extended beyond Anatolia. His next objective was to cross into Europe, marking the first major Ottoman step towards becoming an imperial power. By 1354, Orhan's army captured Gallipoli, giving the Ottomans their first foothold in the Balkans. This event would change the course of European history forever. The early Ottoman military and the creation of the Janissaries, Orhan I introduced a revolutionary military innovation that would shape the Ottoman Empire for centuries. The Janissary. This elite infantry corps was composed of Christian boys taken from conquered lands, converted to Islam, and trained as professional soldiers. They were forbidden from marrying and owed complete loyalty to the Sultan. The Janissaries became one of the most disciplined and effective military forces in the world. This system, known as the Devshirme, allowed the Ottomans to field a powerful standing army that could match or surpass any European military force. It also ensured that the Sultan had a loyal, well-trained corps of soldiers independent from the tribal factions within the empire. With this powerful new force, the Ottomans were ready for further conquest. The Ottoman expansion into Europe, 1354-1362 CE. With their strong military and Gallipoli as a staging ground, the Ottomans quickly expanded into the Balkans. Orhan's son, Murad I, led campaigns into Thrace, capturing Adrianople. The Serbian and Bulgarian regions were divided and politically weak. The Byzantines, already weakened by internal conflicts and wars against Venice and Genoa, were powerless to stop the advance. By 1362, the Ottomans controlled vast territories in both Anatolia and the Balkans, making them a dominant power in the region. This set the stage for the further expansion under Murad I and his successors, leading to the eventual siege and capture of Constantinople a century later. The expansion of the Ottomans under Murad I, 1362-1402 CE. By 1362, the Ottoman Empire had already established itself as a rising power. The conquest of Bursa, the establishment of the Janissaries, and the capture of Gallipoli had set the stage for further expansion. Now under Murad I, the Ottomans would push deeper into Europe, cementing their hold over the Balkans and challenging the Christian kingdoms of the region. Murad I and the expansion into the Balkans, 1362–1489 CE. With his father Orhan's death in 1362, Murad I ascended to the throne. He inherited a strong army and a well-organized state, but his ambitions were greater than just consolidating power in Anatolia. His focus turned to the Balkans, where the Ottomans had already captured Gallipoli. His strategy was twofold: conquer weak and divided Christian states, using diplomacy when necessary, maintain pressure on the Byzantine Empire, slowly cutting off their territories. Murad's first major victory came with the capture of Adrianople. This city became the new Ottoman capital, marking the permanent Ottoman presence in Europe. From Adrian, Murad launched a series of campaigns into Thrace, Bulgaria and Serbia, bringing many of these lands under Ottoman vassalage. The fragmented Balkan states, constantly at odds with each other, struggled to present a unified resistance against the Ottomans. Despite several Christian coalitions, the Ottomans kept winning battles and expanding their control, but Murad's biggest challenge was yet to come. The Battle of Kosovo, 1389, a defining moment. By 1389, the Ottomans had control over much of Macedonia, Bulgaria and parts of Serbia. This alarmed the Christian rulers of the Balkans, leading to the formation of a Serbian-led coalition against the Ottomans. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Kosovo, where Murad I faced an army led by Prince Lazar of Serbia. The battle took place on June 28, 1389, near Pristina. The Ottoman army was well organized, with Janissary infantry, cavalry and archers. The Serbian army, despite being outnumbered, fought fiercely. The fighting was intense, but the Ottomans ultimately triumphed, securing Kosovo and Serbia under their control. However, the victory came at a great cost. Murad I was assassinated on the battlefield by a Serbian noble. Despite the loss of their sultan, the Ottomans remained victorious, and Murad's son Bayezid III immediately took command. The lightning expansion under Bayezid I, 1389–1402, Bayezid I, known as Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, wasted no time in asserting his authority. He had three key objectives: crush any resistance in the Balkans, strengthen Ottoman control over Anatolia, prepare for the eventual conquest of Constantinople. Bayezid quickly solidified Ottoman rule over Serbia and extended his campaigns into Hungary, pushing toward the Danube River. Bosnia was bringing more territories under Ottoman influence, but it was his siege of Constantinople in 1394 that truly alarmed the Christian world. The Byzantine Empire, now reduced to just a few territories, faced imminent destruction. To stop the Ottomans, Pope Boniface X called for a new crusade. The Crusade of Nicopolis, 1396, a major Ottoman victory. In 1396, an allied Christian army, consisting of Hungarians, French knights, Germans and Venetians, marched to confront Bayezid. Their goal was simple: destroy the Ottomans, and lift the siege of Constantinople. The two armies met at Nicopolis, Bulgaria in September 1396. Despite being outnumbered, Bayezid outmaneuvered the Crusaders by using fast cavalry charges, disciplined Janissary formation, strategic use of archers and terrain. The Crusaders suffered a devastating defeat, and Bayezid had thousands of prisoners executed. With this victory, the Ottomans became the dominant power in the Balkans, leaving the Byzantine Empire as nothing more than a vassal state. But just as it seemed the Ottomans were unstoppable, a new threat emerged from the east: Timur Tamerlane. The invasion of Timur and the temporary collapse of the Ottomans, 1402. While Bayezid focused on expanding westward, the Timurid Empire, led by Timur, was rapidly conquering Persia and Central Asia. Timur saw the Ottomans as a rival power and an obstacle to his ambition. In 1402, Timur launched an invasion into Anatolia, bringing his powerful cavalry and war elephants. The two forces met at the Battle of Ankara in July 1402. Bayezid, confident in his Janissaries and cavalry, faced Timur's highly disciplined and experienced army. However, the Ottomans were outmatched, and Bayezid was ultimately captured. The defeat was catastrophic. The Ottoman army was shattered. Bayezid was imprisoned and later died in captivity. The empire was thrown into chaos, leading to a period known as the Ottoman Interregnum. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire faced the possibility of complete destruction. The devastating defeat at the Battle of Ankara, 1402, had shattered the once mighty Ottoman army. With Sultan Bayezid I captured and later died in captivity, the empire was on the brink of collapse. The following years would be marked by a bloody civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum, as Bayezid's sons fought for the throne. But from this chaos, a new leader would emerge, Mehmed I, who would reunite the empire and set the stage for its greatest conquest yet, the fall of Constantinople in the Ottoman Interregnum, 1402-1413, a civil war for control. Following Bayezid I's defeat, the Ottoman state fragmented as his sons turned on each other, each seeking to claim the throne. This period, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, 1402-1413, saw 5 of Bayezid's sons competing for power. Suleiman Çelebi controlled the Balkans and ruled from Edirne. Isa Çelebi took control of Bursa in Anatolia. Musa Çelebi challenged Suleiman in Europe. Mehmed Çelebi, later Mehmed I, ruled in Amasya and had the strongest claim. Mustafa Çelebi was captured by Timur's forces, and later emerged as a rival pretender. Between 1402 and 1413, the brothers waged a brutal war fighting for dominance. The decisive moment came when Mehmed Çelebi defeated Musa Çelebi in 1413, emerging as the sole ruler. Crowning himself Sultan Mehmed I, he became known as the Restorer for his role in reuniting the Ottoman state. Despite Timur's invasion, the Ottomans had survived, but their challenges were far from over. The rule of Mehmed I, 1413, his priorities were restoring control over Anatolia, which had fragmented after Timur's invasion, reasserting Ottoman authority in the Balkans, where vassals had broken away, dealing with the Byzantine Empire, which had supported rival claimants to the throne. To achieve stability, he defeated rebellious Turkish principalities in Anatolia, bringing them back under Ottoman rule, reaffirmed Ottoman vassalage over Serbia and Bulgaria in the Balkans, crushed the last pretender, Mustafa Çelebi, and by the time of his death in 1421, the empire was once again unified and ready for expansion. His son, Murad II, would continue his legacy, but face even greater challenges. Murad II and the European threat, 1421-1451. Murad II took the throne in 1421, inheriting an empire that was stabilized but surrounded by enemies. His reign was marked by constant warfare against European coalitions that sought to push the Ottomans out of the Balkans. The Byzantine betrayal and siege of Constantinople, 1422. Soon after taking power, the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel II Palaeologus, supported a rival Ottoman prince, hoping to weaken the empire. In retaliation, Murad II launched a full-scale siege of Constantinople. The Ottomans came close to capturing the city, but an internal rebellion in Anatolia forced Murad to withdraw. The Byzantines had escaped once again, but it was clear that their empire was on borrowed time. The Battle of Varna, 1444, a decisive victory against the Crusaders. By the 1440s, European powers saw an opportunity to drive the Ottomans out of Europe. A Christian coalition, led by Hungary, Poland, Venice, the Pope, launched a crusade against the Ottomans. Murad defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Varna in 1444, crushing the Christian hopes of reclaiming the Balkans. With this victory, the Ottoman Empire was now the dominant power in southeastern Europe. Murad II later retired from the throne, leaving his young son Mehmed II as Sultan. But after internal instability, Murad was forced to return, leading the Ottomans to another major victory at the Second Battle of Kosovo, in 1414. Mehmed II in the fall of Constantinople, 1453. At just 19 years old, Mehmed II took the throne in 1451. Unlike his predecessors, who had tried and failed to take Constantinople, Mehmed was fully committed to capturing the city. The preparation for the siege. Knowing that the city's defenses were formidable, he made several key preparations, built the massive fortress of Rumeli Hazare on the Bosporus, cutting off the city from Black Sea reinforcement, assembled a huge army of 80,000–100,000 soldiers, including elite Janissaries, constructed massive cannons, designed by Hungarian engineer Urban, to breach the city walls. The Byzantines, despite being vastly outnumbered, prepared for one final They were led by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, who vowed to fight to the death. The siege and final assault, April-May 1453. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman bombardment of Constantinople began. For 7 weeks, Mehmed's forces pounded the walls with artillery, slowly weakening them, blocked the city's harbor, cutting off all hope of reinforcements, used siege towers and tunnels to attack from multiple directions. Despite fierce resistance, by May 29, 1453, the walls were breached, and the Ottomans stormed the city. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died fighting on the wall. With the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist, and Mehmed II declared himself the new ruler of Rome, Caesar of Rome. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople was renamed Istanbul, and became the new capital of the empire. This marked the end of the Middle Ages, and the beginning of the Ottoman Golden Age. Expansion and the rise of a superpower, 1453. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked a turning point for the Ottoman Empire. The once small Anatolian principality had now transformed into the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean. With the Byzantine Empire gone, the Ottomans turned their attention toward expanding their influence across Europe, the Middle East and North Africa. The reign of Mehmed II, the Conqueror, and his successors would define the Ottoman Golden Age, a time of military dominance, economic prosperity, and cultural achievement. Mehmed II's ambitions after Constantinople, 1453-1481. With Constantinople secured, Sultan Mehmed II sought to expand his territory and power. His next objectives were destroying the last remnants of Byzantine rule in Greece and the Balkans, expanding Ottoman influence deeper into Eastern Europe, strengthening the empire's naval power in the Mediterranean, the conquest of the Balkans. Mehmed's first major campaign after 1453 was to eliminate the remaining Byzantine stronghold. In 1458, the Ottomans captured Athens and the Peloponnesian Peninsula. By 1461, they took Trebizond, the last Byzantine successor state. Serbia fell in 1459, followed by Bosnia in 14. By the late 1460s, the Ottomans controlled all of the Balkans, forcing European rulers to recognize their growing dominance. War against Venice and the expansion into Italy. Mehmed also set his sights on Venice, one of the richest and most powerful city-states in Europe. In 1463, the Ottomans launched a long war against Venice, capturing key territories in Greece. By 1479, Venice was forced to sign a peace treaty, ceding islands and paying annual tribute. Mehmed even attempted to conquer Italy, launching an attack on Otranto in 1480, but his death in 1481 ended the campaign. With Mehmed's passing, the empire entered a brief power struggle before his son, Bayezid II, secured the throne. Bayezid II and strengthening of the empire, 1481-1512. Unlike his father, Bayezid II focused on consolidation rather than expansion. His main objectives were strengthening the empire's institutions and internal administration, reforming the military and the economy, dealing with internal revolts and succession disputes. The Ottoman-Safavid conflict and internal unrest. Bayezid's reign was challenged by two major threats. His brother, Selim Sultan, tried to claim the throne with European backing. The rise of the Safavid dynasty in Persia, which spread Shia Islam into Ottoman territory, caused religious and political instability. Bayezid eventually defeated Selim, forcing him into exile, but the Safavid threat remained. Despite these challenges, Bayezid expanded the Ottoman navy, making it the strongest in the Mediterranean, welcomed thousands of expelled Jews and Muslims from Spain in 1492, strengthening the empire's economy, strengthened trade routes across Anatolia and the Balkans. However, toward the end of his reign, Bayezid's focus on internal affairs led many to believe the empire needed a more aggressive leader. That leader would be his son, Selim I, who overthrew his father. Selim I, the conqueror of the Middle East, 1512-1520, nicknamed Selim the Grim. Selim I was a ruthless but effective ruler, who shifted Ottoman expansion toward the Islamic world. His main goal was to defeat the Safavid Empire in Persia, expand Ottoman rule into the Islamic heartlands, Syria, Egypt, and the Arabian Peninsula. The Battle of Chaldiran, 1514, defeating the Safavids. The biggest threat to the Ottomans in the early 16th century was Shah Ismail I of the Safavid Empire. Shah Ismail sought to spread Shia Islam and challenged Ottoman dominance in Anatolia. In 1514, Selim I invaded Persia,
meeting Ismail at the Battle of Chaldiran. The Safavids were defeated due to the Ottomans' superior firearms and disciplined janissary. This victory, weakened Safavid influence in Anatolia, allowed the Ottomans to take control of eastern Anatolia, marked the beginning of a centuries-long Ottoman-Safavid rivalry. The conquest of Egypt and the Mamluks 1516–1517. After securing Anatolia, Selim turned his attention to Egypt and the Mamluk Sultanate, which controlled Syria and the Levant, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, the rich lands of Egypt. In 1516, Selim marched into Syria, defeating the Mamluks at the Battle of Marj Dabik. By 1517, he had taken Cairo, ending Mamluk rule. This conquest was one of the most significant in Ottoman history because the Ottomans became the dominant Islamic power, controlling Mecca and Medina. Selim I claimed the title of Caliph, making the Ottomans the leaders of the Muslim world. The Ottomans gained Egypt's wealth, turning Istanbul into a global trade hub. By the time of Selim's death in 1520, the Ottoman Empire had doubled in size, stretching from Hungary to the Arabian Peninsula. The age of Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520–1566, with Selim I's conquests of Egypt and the Levant, the empire now controlled Mecca, Medina and Cairo, securing its position as the leader of the Muslim world. But it was under Suleiman I, known as Suleiman the Magnificent, that the empire reached its true peak. The expansion into Europe, 1521–1541. One of Suleiman's first objectives was to expand Ottoman influence deeper into Europe. His primary targets were Hungary and the Habsburgs, to challenge Christian Europe, the Mediterranean and North Africa to control trade, Persia to check Safavid expansion, the Siege of Belgrade, 1521, opening the door to Central Europe. Suleiman's first major victory was the capture of Belgrade in 1521, a key fortress on the Danube River. The Hungarians who controlled the city were unprepared. The Ottomans surrounded Belgrade, cutting off supplies. After a short siege, the city surrendered. This victory opened the path to Hungary and sent shockwaves through Europe. The Battle of Mohacs, 1526. The fall of Hungary. In 1526, Suleiman marched further into Hungary, meeting the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs. The Ottomans used heavy artillery and cavalry to crush the Hungarian forces. The Hungarian king, Louis II, was killed in battle. Hungary was now split into three parts. Ottoman-controlled Hungary, Habsburg-controlled Hungary, the semi-independent Principality of Transylvania. This victory made the Ottomans the dominant power in Eastern Europe. The Siege of Vienna, 1529. The limit of Ottoman expansion. After securing Hungary, Suleiman set his sights on Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire. In 1529, the Ottoman army of 120,000 men laid siege to Vienna. The city was well fortified, and the siege was hindered by bad weather. After 2 months, the Ottomans retreated, marking the end of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. Though unsuccessful, the Siege of Vienna proved that the Ottomans were the most powerful empire in the world at the time. Dominance in the Mediterranean, 1534–1571. Apart from Europe, Suleiman sought to expand Ottoman naval power. His main rival was the Habsburg-controlled Spanish Empire, led by Charles V. To secure Ottoman dominance, he relied on one of the greatest admirals in history, Hayreddin Barbarossa. The conquest of North Africa, 1534–1544. In 1534, the Ottomans captured Tunis, securing a stronghold in North Africa. By 1541, Ottoman forces controlled Algiers, Tripoli and much of the Maghreb region. Barbarossa's fleet defeated the Spanish navy, making the Ottomans the undisputed naval power in the Mediterranean. The Siege of Malta, 1565. The Knights hold firm. One of the last major naval battles of Suleiman's reign was the Siege of Malta in 15. John, a Christian military order, held the island. The Ottomans sent 40,000 men to capture it. After months of fighting, the siege failed, marking one of the few Ottoman defeats of the century. Despite this, the Ottoman navy remained the dominant force in the region. The war against the Safavids, 1532–1555. While expanding in Europe and the Mediterranean, the Ottomans also had an ongoing rivalry with the Safavid Empire in Persia. The Ottomans captured Baghdad, 1534, securing control of Iraq. They took Tabriz and parts of Armenia and Georgia. After decades of fighting, the war ended with the Treaty of Amasya in 1555. recognizing Ottoman control over Iraq and the Arabian Peninsula. This victory secured Ottoman dominance over the Eastern Islamic world. Suleiman the Lawgiver, reforms and administration. Beyond military success, Suleiman is known for his legal and administrative reform. His achievements included reforming tax systems to make taxation fairer for peasants, codifying laws led to the development of Kanun, Ottoman civil law, improving religious tolerance, allowing Jews and Christians to practice freely under Ottoman rule. His fair rule earned him the title Suleiman the Lawgiver in the Islamic world. Suleiman's reign also saw the greatest achievements in Ottoman architecture, literature and architecture. The rise of Mimar Sinan. Mimar Sinan, Suleiman's chief architect, designed the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, the Süleymaniye Mosque in Edirne. Several bridges, aqueducts, and palaces still stand today. His works defined Ottoman architecture for centuries. Literature and art. Ottoman poetry and literature flourished, influenced by Persian and Arabic traditions. Tilework and calligraphy reached new heights, seen in the Blue Mosque and Topkapi Palace. The empire was not only militarily powerful but also a cultural and intellectual hub.
As Suleiman the Magnificent passed away in 1566, the Ottoman Empire stood at its greatest territorial and cultural height. However, his death marked the beginning of a slow decline. Internal corruption and power struggles grew. The once great military machine began to falter. A new power structure, known as the Sultanate of Women, emerged, influencing imperial politics. The Ottomans struggled against a rising Europe, particularly the Habsburgs and Russia. The influence of the harem and grand viziers, the military defeats and political instability of the late 16th and 17th centuries. The once unstoppable empire now faced its first real challenges. The rule of weak sultans. 1566-16 Suri. After Suleiman's death, his son Selim II took the throne. Unlike his father, Selim II was weak, uninterested in ruling, and left governance to his advisors. He spent more time drinking wine than leading armies. His grand vizier and palace officials controlled most political matters. This marked the beginning of the empire's reliance on administrators rather than sultans. The Ottoman-Venetian War and the Battle of Lepanto, 1571. Despite Selim II's lack of leadership, the Ottomans continued their military campaigns. The empire invaded Cyprus, which was ruled by Venice. In response, the Holy League, Spain, Venice and the Pope, formed a Christian alliance. The two forces clashed in the Battle of Lepanto, 1571, one of the largest naval battles in history. The result: the Ottoman navy suffered a devastating defeat. This was the first major loss for the Ottomans in the Mediterranean. Though they quickly rebuilt their fleet, Ottoman dominance at sea was never the same. This battle shook the confidence of the empire and signaled the rise of European naval power. The Sultanate of Women. One of the most unique aspects of the Ottoman decline was the rise of the Sultanate of Women. With weak or child sultans on the throne, power shifted to the imperial harem. Key figures in this period included Kösem Sultan, 1590-1651, the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. She ruled as regent for her son and later her grandson. She controlled imperial appointments and military actions. Assassinated in 1651 by the rival faction in the harem, Turhan Sultan, Kösem's rival and successor. She influenced the reign of Mehmed III. She helped rebuild the military order after years of instability. For nearly a century, the empire was ruled from behind the walls of the palace, not the battlefield. Corruption grew as officials bribed their way into power. Military discipline declined. The empire became less aggressive in expansion and more focused on internal dispute. The decline of the Janissaries and the Salali revolts, 1590s, 1650s. Another major problem was the breakdown of the Janissary Corps. Originally, Janissaries were elite soldiers taken from Christian lands, trained in loyalty, discipline and military expertise, a key reason for Ottoman military success. However, by the late 16th century, Janissaries became corrupt and lazy. They demanded more privileges and refused to follow orders. Many took civilian jobs and ignored military duties. They overthrew sultans they disliked, further weakening stability. At the same time, Anatolia suffered from the Salali revolts, 1595 to 1610, peasant uprisings against high taxes and corrupt governors. Local warlords challenged Ottoman rule. This weakened control over central Anatolia, the empire's heartland. These internal struggles forced the Ottomans to focus on stability rather than expansion. The Ottoman-Safavid wars and European conflicts. The empire was also struggling on multiple fronts. War against the Safavids, 16 Suri, 1639. The Safavids of Persia reclaimed Iraq, taking Baghdad in 1624. Sultan Murad III launched a campaign to recapture Baghdad in 1638. The Ottomans regained the city, but the war drained resources. While the east was unstable, the Ottomans also faced new challenges in Europe. The long Turkish War against the Austrian Habsburgs ended in a stalemate, showing Ottoman military weakness. The Battle of Vienna, 1683. The end of Ottoman expansion. The final turning point in Ottoman expansion came in 1683. The Ottomans, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, besieged Vienna for the second time. The city held out, and a relief army led by Poland's King John III Sobieski arrived. The Ottomans were defeated, marking the end of their expansion into Europe. This defeat led to the Great Turkish War, 1683-1699, in which Hungary and Transylvania were lost to the Austrians. The Russians, Poles and Venetians took Ottoman land. In 1699 the Ottomans signed the Treaty of Karlowitz, the first time they formally lost European territory. This was the beginning of Ottoman territorial decline. Reform attempts in the Köprülü Grand Vizier. Years of weakness, a new family of Grand Viziers, the Köprülüs, attempted to reform the empire. The Köprülü Grand Viziers 1656-17 Suri restored discipline in the Janissary, strengthened administration and tax collection, launched successful campaigns against Venice and Austria. However, the momentum was short-lived. The loss at Vienna in 1683 proved that the empire could no longer dominate Europe. Internal corruption continued. The Ottoman economy declined as European trade routes bypassed the Middle East. By the end of the 17th century, the Ottomans had lost their military edge. The empire had lost Hungary and Transylvania to Austria. Russia and Venice had taken Ottoman territories. The Ottomans signed the Treaty of Karlowitz, 1699, marking the first major territorial loss in Ottoman history. For the first time, the empire was not expanding. It was struggling to hold its ground. The Treaty of Karlowitz and the loss of European dominance, 1699-1730. The Treaty of Karlowitz, 1699, was a turning point. Hungary, Transylvania and Slavonia were ceded to Austria. Venice took Morea, southern Greece. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth reclaimed territories in Ukraine. The Ottomans had to accept defeat for the first time in their history. To prevent further losses, the empire shifted focus from conquest to diplomacy. Sultans now prioritized internal stability rather than territorial expansion. They relied more on treaties and alliances with European states. The Ottomans formed temporary alliances with France and Prussia to counter Austria and Russia. Despite efforts to stabilize the empire, new threats arose. The rise of Russia and the Russo-Turkish Wars, 1710-1774. One of the biggest challenges the Ottomans faced in the 18th century was Russia's expansion. Peter the Great and the Russo-Turkish War, 1710-1711. Russian Tsar Peter the Great sought to expand southward and gain access to the Black Sea. In 1710, Russia invaded Ottoman territory, but the Ottoman army surrounded Peter's forces at the Pruth River. Peter was forced to sign a humiliating treaty, giving up his ambitions for now. But Russia did not give up. Catherine the Great and the Russo-Turkish War, 1768-1774. Under Catherine the Great, Russia launched another invasion into Ottoman land. The Ottoman army was outmatched, poorly trained, and using outdated weapons. Russia crushed the Ottomans at the Battle of Chesma 1770, destroying most of the Ottoman fleet. By 1774, the Ottomans were forced to sign the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, which had devastating consequences. The treaty gave Russia the right to protect Orthodox Christians living in the Ottoman Empire. control over Crimea, which Russia later annexed in 7, free navigation for Russian ships in the Black Sea. This treaty marked the decline of Ottoman control over the Black Sea region. Russia was now the dominant power in Eastern Europe, and the Ottomans were on the defensive. The Tulip period and early reforms 1718–1730. Despite military defeats, the Ottoman elite began to embrace European cultural and technological advancement. This era, known as the Tulip period 1718–1730, saw new printing presses, despite resistance from conservative religious leaders, the first Western-style diplomatic missions in Europe. New architectural styles were inspired by French and Dutch design. However, the Tulip period ended abruptly in 1730, when the Patrona Halil rebellion broke out, led by angry janissaries and merchants. Protesters stormed the palace, killing government officials. The Sultan was forced to flee, and the reforms were halted. This rebellion showed the deep divide between the conservative factions in the empire and those who wanted modernization. The decline of the janissaries and military weakness, 1730–1790s. The Ottoman military, once the empire's greatest strength, had deteriorated significantly. The Janissary problem. Originally, the Janissaries were elite soldiers who followed strict discipline. By the 18th century, they became corrupt and undisciplined. They refused to adopt new weapons or tactics. Many opened businesses, married, and ignored military duty. They overthrew sultans and controlled government decisions through force. Failed military campaigns. The Ottomans lost another war with Austria, 1735–1739, giving up more territory. The Serbian Revolt, 1788–1791, further weakened control over the Balkan. By the 1790s, European armies were far more advanced than the Ottomans. These losses exposed the empire's inability to defend itself. Ottoman leaders knew they had to modernize, but the Janissaries resisted every attempt at reform. Economic decline and European trade competition. While European economies boomed during the Industrial Revolution, the Ottoman economy stagnated. Trade decline. The Ottomans relied heavily on trade routes between Europe and Asia. But after the Age of Exploration, European merchants bypassed Ottoman-controlled routes. Instead of using Ottoman ports, ships traveled around Africa and through the Atlantic. This drastically reduced Ottoman tax revenue. Inflation and debt. European silver flooded the Ottoman markets, causing massive inflation. The government borrowed money from European banks, leading to mounting debt. Corrupt officials stole funds, worsening financial problems. By the late 1700s, the Ottoman economy was in deep crisis. Selim III and the last attempt at reform, 1789–1880, he reduced the power of the Janissaries, trying to replace them with modern soldiers. He opened new schools, sending students to Europe to learn modern sciences and military tactics. However, the Janissaries saw these reforms as a direct threat. They rebelled, overthrowing and imprisoning Selim III. A year later, he was executed by the Janissaries, marking the failure of his modernization attempt. Selim's death proved that the empire's conservative factions were unwilling to change, even as the Ottomans fell further behind Europe. Economic stagnation made it reliant on European loans. Internal revolts threatened to tear the empire apart. Napoleonic Wars and the Ottoman response. The Greek War of Independence, 1821. The rise of nationalist movements led to the Ottoman collapse. As the world entered the modern age, the Ottoman Empire struggled to survive. The Napoleonic Wars and Ottoman involvement, 1798–1815. At the start of the 19th century, the Ottomans faced a new European threat, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon invades Egypt, 1798–1881. In 1798, French leader Napoleon Bonaparte launched an invasion of Egypt. His goal was to cut off Britain's trade routes and challenge Ottoman control. The French army quickly defeated the Ottomans and took Cairo. However, Napoleon underestimated the power of the British Navy. At the Battle of the Nile, 1798, British Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed Napoleon's fleet. Without reinforcements, the French were stranded in Egypt. In 1881, the British and Ottomans forced Napoleon's army to surrender. The war exposed Ottoman weakness. The empire couldn't defend itself without European help.
The Greek War of Independence, 1821-1830. The biggest challenge to Ottoman control came from Greece. For centuries the Ottomans ruled over Christian Greeks. However, Greek nationalism was growing. The Greek Revolt begins, 1821. In 1821, Greek rebels launched a mass uprising. Greek revolutionaries declared independence and attacked Ottoman garrisons. The Ottomans responded with brutal massacres, killing thousands. European intervention. By 1827 the Ottomans were losing the war. European nations saw Greece as part of their cultural heritage, and stepped in. Britain, France, and Russia defeated the Ottoman fleet at the Battle of Navarino 1827. In 1830 the Ottoman Empire was forced to recognize Greek independence. This was a major turning point. For the first time, a European Christian nation broke free from Ottoman rule. The Tanzimat reforms, 1839-1876. Seeing the empire fall apart, the Ottomans launched a final attempt to modernize. This period, known as the Tanzimat reorganization, aimed to reform the military by adopting European tactics, end corruption and create a modern bureaucracy, grant equal rights to all religious groups, Christians and Jews included. Key reforms. Abolishing feudalism, 1839. The empire ended tax farming and introduced state-controlled taxation. New legal system 1856. The Ottomans introduced European-style laws, reducing the power of religious courts. Military reforms. The army adopted Western uniforms, training and weapons. Janissaries were permanently abolished in 1826. However, these reforms angered conservative Muslims, who saw them as a betrayal of Islamic traditions. The Crimean War and the decline of Ottoman power 1853. By the 1850s, Russia was still the biggest threat to the Ottomans. In 1853, Russia invaded the Balkans, triggering the Crimean War. European support saves the Ottomans. Britain and France allied with the Ottomans to stop Russia. The war ended in 1856 with an Ottoman victory, but only because of European help. The Treaty of Paris 1856 temporarily blocked Russian expansion. However, the Ottomans became more dependent on Europe. The empire borrowed huge sums of money from Britain and France. By the 1860s the Ottomans were deeply in debt. This war delayed the collapse, but the empire was still on life support. The Balkan revolts and nationalist uprisings, 1870-1913. The Ottomans controlled most of the Balkans, but their grip was slipping. Serbia, Bulgaria and Romania revolt, 1875-1878. Inspired by Greek independence, other Balkan nations revolted. Russia supported the rebels, seeing an opportunity to expand southward. In 1877, Russia declared war on the Ottomans. The Russo-Turkish War 1877-1878. The war was a disaster for the Ottomans. In 1878, the Ottomans were forced to sign the Treaty of Berlin. This treaty recognized the independence of Serbia, Montenegro and Romania. Bulgaria became an autonomous region, heavily influenced by Russia. By the 1880s the Ottomans had lost most of their European territories. The Young Turks and the final collapse, 1908-1918. As the 20th century began, the Ottoman Empire was weak and corrupt. The government was controlled by incompetent sultans. The military was outdated. The empire was financially bankrupt. In 1908 a political group called the Young Turks staged a revolution. They overthrew the Sultan and established a constitutional monarchy. The Young Turks wanted to modernize Turkey and restore national pride. However, World War I would soon bring everything crashing down. World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire. In 1914 the Ottomans joined World War I on the side of Germany. They fought against Britain, France, and Russia. The war devastated the empire. In 1918 the Ottomans surrendered, and Allied forces occupied Constantinople. The Treaty of Sèvres, 1920. The treaty dismantled the empire, dividing it among the European powers. Britain took Iraq and Palestine. France took Syria and Lebanon. Greece occupied parts of western Turkey. This marked the official end of the Ottoman Empire. However, one last chapter remained, the Turkish War of Independence. Led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The birth of modern Turkey, 1923, Mustafa Kemal abolished the Ottoman Sultanate and established the Republic of Turkey. The last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, fled into exile, marking the final end of the empire. But in the end it could not survive the modern world. The empire's legacy, however, still shapes the Middle East, the Balkans and Turkey today.